Welcome back, everyone in the Thai world. Hopefully everyone is enjoying the Atlanta track. And we just covered Animesh Cortana's startup journey and ideation. And now to continue the journey and talk about scale and funding is going to be Dr. Angela Fusaro. Dr. Angela Fusaro is an emergency medicine physician who's passionate about healthcare and innovation, which you're going to learn a little bit about her journey and what her product does. I'd like to highlight that she was also part of our inaugural Thai Access program. The goal of that program was also to be able to provide mentorship and funding to minority and women-led businesses. And Dr. Angela Fusaro was the first runner-up or the winner for the Access program, and she'll be competing in the actual Access program that's going to be taking place globally. Specific to her keynote today, you're going to hear a lot about, the extended journey about going to, really having that product ready, and then the scale opportunity after when you actually get that funding. So without further ado, Dr. Angela Fusaro.
Thank you so much, Amin. Really happy to be here, and thanks everyone for just your enthusiasm and flexibility with, everything being virtual in this unprecedented year. I'm going to talk a little bit about my personal and my professional journey, which you'll see interfaces with COVID-19 on multiple levels. So thanks for the opportunity to be here. I thought we would start off with just a little bit about my relationship with Atlanta, since that is what today is about, the Atlanta track. And, I'd love to say that what drew me to Atlanta was something very strategic, or that I had the foresight that Atlanta would become the technology and startup ecosystem that it has become. But the truth is that the first time I came to Atlanta, it was for college. And as a rebellious teenager, the way I started to select my college was by drawing a 500-mile radius around my home in the Northeast in Connecticut, near New York. And I looked for colleges outside of that radius because I really wanted to go to school far, far from home. So that's what first brought me to Atlanta to attend Emory University. I didn't know that, years later, Atlanta would become one of the best places, in my opinion, to start a technology company and a healthcare technology company. There are so many elements of Atlanta that make this the prime place for innovation. Things like there are so many academic institutions here, both with a technology focus and a healthcare focus. We have a great talent pool. There's a ton of incubators, both housed within academia and outside. And I think, one that might be particularly relevant for this audience, I do feel that investors get great value here. There are formalized metrics that look at this, the multiple on invested capital. When you look at those metrics or similar metrics for Atlanta, we are really in the highest echelon when you compare us to other cities like Raleigh or Austin. And that's because we have a very scrappy culture. So, rather than investing in an overcapitalized flashy company, typically here in Atlanta, you're getting really committed founders who have been able to be strategic and efficient with their capital. So just a little bit about Atlanta and my experience here as a founder. As Amin mentioned, I am an emergency medicine physician. That's where my professional journey started. I, attended medical school in New York. I did my residency training in Charlotte, North Carolina, and then came back to Atlanta as a faculty member at Emory in the School of Medicine. And at that time, was really surprised and disappointed with how often I heard my colleagues complaining about the inadequacies of healthcare. And unfortunately, they teach you a lot of things in medical school, but they don't teach you how to translate that clinical insight into a marketable product or solution or service. And so that's what prompted me to get my MBA. I really wanted to be able to better fit those pieces together. And, emergency medicine physician to tech startup CEO might seem like a strange transition, but the truth is that I feel that my training in emergency medicine in many ways armed me with all of the necessary skills to do this well. In addition to forcing me to be an expert at making consequential decisions with incomplete information. It also, you know, the emergency department is I call it the gateway to not just the healthcare system, but really to humanity. I don't think there is a better place to study the human condition than the emergency department. And so after seeing so many patients struggle to gain access to care, you know, spending hours in germ-infested emergency departments for something as simple as a throat swab, many of them, you know, paying out of pocket hundreds to thousands of dollars because they either were not insured or perhaps they were insured, but they have a high deductible plan. And so, you know, there's only so many times you can kind of see that struggle before you say to yourself, well, I know there's got to be a better way to do this. And that was really the genesis of Physician 360. You know, we were, and I'll talk a little bit more about the company in just a second. We were testing and treating for time-sensitive conditions well before coronavirus. Obviously, the need and the value proposition of that became much more obvious during COVID-19. And I think it was really during that time that I and the company became recognized as a thought leader in this space, because the conversation really changed with coronavirus. It went from telemedicine and remote diagnostics are nice to have, or they're part of the future, to they are the new normal and they're absolutely fundamental to have to practice medicine safely. So to that point, our vision at Physician 360, my co-founder is also an emergency medicine physician, and we really charged ourselves with completely reimagining the practice of urgent care. So similar to the simplicity of the home pregnancy test, we have envisioned a world where you could walk into a neighborhood pharmacy, pick up a test kit, take that test, interact with one of our doctors on your smartphone, and ideally be walking out of that pharmacy less than 30 minutes later for less than $50 with a treatment solution. And essentially that's what we built. It was a platform that provided patients with access to cost-effective, convenient, and diagnostically accurate care for simple medical illnesses. So I know we don't really have an option for audience interaction or participation in this format, but you know, if I asked each of you to think about who in the audience has ever had something like a UTI or flu, and you've gone to an urgent care or an ER, or even to your primary care physician, you know, how much did you spend for that visit? How much time did it take, both in scheduling the appointment and then actually attending the appointment? And, you know, were you, nowadays, the most relevant question perhaps is, were you exposed to somebody else's germs when you sought care? Well, our model addresses all three of those issues. Our vision was really about creating a virtual experience that was comparable to an in-person brick and mortar traditional appointment. So there's and we'll get into this in just a little bit, but that's one of the things that makes us really different, is that we are delivering an experience to the patient that is 100% comparable to what they would have experienced in a traditional medical appointment. That really solves two problems. Again, providing the patient access to care was the primary problem, but the other problem that we're addressing is that we deliver this care in partnership with independent pharmacies. So what we do is we go into these small neighborhood pharmacies and we transform them into functional urgent cares by providing them with access to telemedicine and rapid testing. Well, part of why this model works so well is because these independent pharmacists are looking for ways to compete with retail pharmacy minute clinics. So I'm sure that many of you are familiar with CVS Minute Clinic, or you've seen one of the recent announcements by Walgreens. They're partnering with a group called Village MD to provide clinical services in their brick and mortar stores. The problem, though, is that in order to build and staff like a brick and mortar clinic, it's upwards of $1 million. Most of these, mom and pop pharmacies don't have the ability to do it, but they have an amazing footprint. There's a neighborhood pharmacy within a few miles, literally, of 90% of Americans. So by providing this solution, not only were we addressing the patient's problem, but we were giving these independent pharmacists a turnkey solution for offering clinical services. I won't spend much time on this, but you can take my word for it that the market for this is quite big. There's over 127 million urgent care visits in the US every year. And so Physician 360 being able to service even 50% of those, it's an incredibly large, serviceable, obtainable market. Just a little bit more on what makes us different. So you might be saying to yourself, I know all about telemedicine. I see things about these other telemedicine companies all the time. Well, what makes Physician 360 so great? Essentially, we're really different and better in two main ways. The first is that we're not just a telemedicine company, and we don't just offer direct-to-consumer lab testing. There are many companies that do one of those things, but we're actually the only company that pair these two things together. And as I referenced earlier, provide the patient with a completely comprehensive experience. And as a doctor myself, and again, my co-founder is a physician, we really wanted to be able to provide the patient with value, and the value lies in connecting the dots for them. And the second thing that makes us different is that we're the only ones partnering with these independent pharmacies and delivering care within their footprint. That's really important because, as I referenced earlier, there's a neighborhood pharmacy within a few miles of over 90% of Americans. So we can increase access to care by partnering with them. But we as a company can also ensure that we get in front of the patient at the right time. Like when they're not feeling well, think about where you go. You might go to the pharmacy to get some throat spray or some cough drops. Well, we can get in front of the patient at the right time, which means we can increase our likelihood of conversion and keep our cost of acquisition low. So this was some of the momentum that we were experiencing as it led up to the TIE Access pitch competition. We have now, treated thousands of patients for a variety of conditions. Again, we service just about anything you would go to an urgent care for. So strep, flu, urinary tract infection, rash, ear infection. This year we rolled out a few new products, most of which were related to coronavirus. As I mentioned earlier, we were testing and treating for time-sensitive conditions before the pandemic, so it was great that we were able to parlay that expertise and infrastructure into playing a meaningful role in the pandemic. So we rolled out new testing kit options for COVID-19. This year we rolled out an ear infection test kit also, which is different than our other kits, but it's like a digital otoscope that allows a remote physician to see in the middle ear and accurately diagnose an ear infection. There's many telemedicine companies that will not diagnose ear infection because they don't have the technology to make an accurate diagnosis. So that's something that we're pretty proud of. We have, from a revenue perspective, experienced approximately 300% year-over-year growth since 2018. And we now have over 1,000 pharmacies in our network, including partnerships with some larger pharmacy chains like Giant Foods, Big Y, and recently a partnership with WeWork servicing their just under 200,000 US-based members to provide them and all of their startup members access to care. So this was the momentum we were experiencing heading into the pitch competition. And at that time, our main driver, and still to this day, but our main drivers for growth are twofold. One has to do with the number of pharmacies in our network. So as you can imagine, if we have 5,000 pharmacies in our network, first of all, our safety net of care is much more comprehensive, but the more locations we have to sell to, obviously that's a growth driver for us. But then the second driver for our growth is how much sell-through each of those pharmacy locations is experiencing. And heading into the pitch competition, that second driver of sell-through was really something that we were focusing on. And so, our model is B to B to C. We had done a pretty good job at that first part, the B2B portion, building this network of about 1,000 pharmacies in just under 2 years, and had really turned our efforts to increasing the sell-through at the pharmacy level. And so with the capital that we were able to raise through the TIAccess pitch competition, we're using that to bring on, a dedicated account manager, and to hone some of the consumer-facing marketing that drives sales at the pharmacy level. That same capital really was also used to embrace and really take advantage of some of the opportunities that presented themselves during COVID. And as I referenced earlier, I do think it was our positioning during the pandemic that really propelled us into this position of being a thought leader for how to expand clinical services at the pharmacy. I think it was a time where, again, before 2020, there was rumblings of pharmacy-based care. And honestly, many of you might be located in places, in other parts of the world, that concept of delivering care at the pharmacy is much more common. But here in the United States, this is incredibly novel. And there have been, again, rumblings of it, but when the coronavirus hit and really tested our healthcare system, I think some of the vulnerabilities were exposed, and the pharmacy became a huge focus for conversation around clinical services. And so, leveraging that capital that we had from TIE, we were able to participate in some pharmacy-based testing programs, and again, further position us to be thought leaders in that space and to prove the model. Finally, we raised a seed round last year that was mostly venture capital from a firm based here in Georgia called Valor Ventures. And obviously no one can predict the future, so we had no idea about COVID. And with that came, a ton of opportunity, but also some challenge and a lot of uncertainty. And so we really weren't well positioned this year we weren't quite ready for our Series A. And so, the bridge capital that we got from TIE really allowed us to solidify the model, really prove out the model that we were using, and explore even a few other channels to prove them as new business cases to help prepare for the Series A that we will launch next year, probably Q1 or Q2. So I think, in many ways, the TIAccess group was instrumental in what we do and getting us well positioned for this next phase of scale. I'm going to stop there. I'm happy to dive deeper on any part of this, but would love to hear what you find to be most relevant. And so, I think we can turn to questions and take it from there. But thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Angela. I hope you can hear me okay.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. Okay. No questions have come in just yet, but would love for you to kind of maybe elaborate on kind of the telemedicine space in terms of, obviously what you guys are working on as you continue to, raise, additional funding and go through that mode of being able to assess what you guys are going to do next. What are you guys looking at in the space for your company about some of the things that, are on the horizon for what could be capable for the funding that you get in the future?
Sure. I think that's a great question. I will start by saying, it happened quickly, but the conversation went from, as I referenced, telemedicine as a nice to have and as an optional, part of healthcare, to telemedicine is now so basic. It's what everyone expects to be part of their care experience. And so I think for us, when we're thinking about next steps, it's so necessary to go beyond telemedicine and start to even reimagine what telemedicine looks like. I think the days of I'm just going to connect with a doctor through what looks like a HIPAA compliant Zoom, those days are gone. And the expectation now is taking it 2 or 3 steps further. And that was what we saw when we first got into this space was, okay, yeah, people are doing telemedicine, but the diagnostic accuracy of telemedicine alone is limited. You know, there's a lot of data to show that, for example, in the case of strep throat, the accuracy for telemedicine alone is about 75%. So that means that 1 out of every 4 patients is getting antibiotics when they don't need it or not getting them when they do. And we kind of said, well, there's got to be a way to make telemedicine itself better. And that really has to do with the tie-in of these remote diagnostics. And so I think when we look at next steps, it's about those peripheral tie-ins. So how do we now connect the telemedicine, the software, to access to imaging studies? So things like you are on the golf course and you think, or maybe or you're on the football field or wherever, and you think you broke your ankle. We want a way where we can, in real time, in less than an hour, connect you with an imaging center, get you a imaging of your ankle without an appointment. It gets integrated into our system seamlessly. One of our physicians can interpret it, and you're walking out with a splint, from your neighborhood pharmacy in less than an hour. An experience before that would have taken 4 to 6 hours in an emergency department. Or the ear infection kit that I referenced earlier, this is taking another technology now and layering it over the telemedicine platform. So for us, it's about making the basic experience of telemedicine better and more accurate.
So it looks like you definitely got a game plan going, which is exciting to hear. As you continue to, I think that's great. I'm glad you had a, just to be able to respond to the audience about, what next steps are. I think is very interesting to know. So I have a question that just came in about kind of the market of what of post-COVID, right? I mean, especially with you guys, I'm seeing you guys are seeing a lot of influx of users on the platform, because right now telemedicine is the way to be able to do things, right? And be able to get something in hand, faster than being able to leave your house. So the question is what will the market look like post-COVID, assuming we're out of this, in the next 6 months? So any light that you guys have, would love to hear.
Sure. I mean, I think there are certain things about the pandemic that will regress back to a mean. And then there are certain things about it that are about it. And by it, I mean our culture, the way we practice medicine, the way we practice life. I mean, that will never go back again. I think healthcare is one of those industries that is decidedly changed. I think there's been certain policy adaptations that support that, meaning if you look at some of the decisions made by CMS or the FDA, it is clear that at a macro level, we have made enough, there's been enough shift, there's enough momentum that telemedicine and remote diagnostics will continue to be part of the future. You're seeing it even in the way that we're starting to train physicians. I know of a couple of places where telemedicine is literally becoming part of the curriculum. So I think when we talk about a post-COVID world, I don't expect it to stay in some ways quite as extreme as it is now, but I do think it has changed how we see the face of healthcare forever.
Appreciate that. I don't think there's any other questions that have come through. So Angela, would love to hear from you about really, let's say, giving some advice, because I know there's been probably a lot of inflection points as you guys go through funding and really articulating kind of what you're looking for. So, would love to, hear from you in terms of how did you define, the thesis for what you were looking for in terms of investments to the potential investors. You had mentioned that Valor Ventures, initially came on first and gave you obviously that first, leap of faith. Tell us kind of what that journey was like, because I think it's important for the folks listening to know about some of the things that you probably learned with that first, investment round with Valor, and then maybe the lessons learned that positioned you to be able to then come to TIE and then use that platform.
Sure. As you just said, it's a journey. There's, I'd be remiss to at least not mention that even if you are incredibly savvy at the journey, there's a lot of lateral steps. You're definitely, for every one investor that you connect with who is the right investor for the company and the phase of the company, et cetera, there's probably 5 that you talk to that aren't the right match. And so I think part of it is the learning curve for the founder of how do you assess who is the right match. And I think one thing that I've learned that helps there is knowing where your company's value inflection points are. So, there's a difference between I am seeking out capital to achieve very tangible things that are going to increase my company's value, versus I'm seeking capital because I'm running out of money and my hair's on fire and I've got to find a solution. So I think, with us, what I've tried to do as I've learned this is figure out exactly what we need to achieve certain milestones that will directly relate to company value inflection points. And so with Valor, that was, an example where we had shown some degree of product market fit. We had a very clear ask of what we needed to prove the product market fit. And we had a very compartmentalized or finite tech need that we needed to build. And so I think being able to say, I've done X, if I can get this capital and do X 3 more times and build Y, we'll be at Z. So making it almost formulaic and undeniable with numbers, I think helped a lot. And same with TIE, I think, I have no idea, but even if I think back to the pitch competition and to presenting the company at that stage, I think I was able to clearly articulate, we've proven this part of the model, and the part that we need a boost in is the B2B2C sell-through. That is a very tactical need, and you can wrap a very finite number around that. And so that's what I would say as far as raising capital. It's maybe in other parts of the country, maybe if you're in Silicon Valley, you can come out with these like astronomical, more pie in the sky type of approaches to fundraising. But I have found that if it is very practical and tied to a very achievable lift that gets you to a new value point, then that's when you're the most successful.
Very interesting and very insightful. So the question that I have just as a follow-up, in terms of the way that you've structured the deal and the way that you've evolved it, right? Because you had mentioned this is a journey. Can you speak to some of the resources that you kind of incorporated along the way? Assuming that, you've had different kind of subject matter experts in terms of valuation, in terms of accounting, pieces like that. When was the right time to have those conversations, and when was it, I would say, open for you to be able to say, hey, yeah, we need help in this area, and we want it to be able to structure it the right way so that an investor can digest it. So maybe talk about some of the resources and when you brought on incremental resources, or if you did or you didn't.
Sure. I'll first just say, and this is not directly related to your question, but we interface with different subject matter experts on a variety of things. Not necessarily related to capital and to finance, but I think the decision about when to bring on those types of advisors and to engage those types of subject matter experts really has to do with your business. So for us, for example, we're in a highly regulated space, especially when it came from COVID. We're in a really uncharted territories as far as expertise. And so we needed advisors in that space at the very beginning so that we didn't make a potentially catastrophic or fatal misstep. To your point, I think when that is and who those experts are is going to be different for everyone's company, depending on the vertical you're in, depending on what exactly your product or service is. As far as when we started to really need more finesse and expertise in the like our cap table and things of that nature. Before we had the seed investment, I did use sort of resources like Carta, and there are services you can participate in that at least help to shepherd a founder through that process. Once Valor came into the picture, they've been really great with helping us through that. And so I guess I would reiterate the importance of the seed investors, because those initial folks who end up on your board, I mean, yes, it's important because they're bringing you capital, but I think beyond the money is the insight, the encouragement, the expertise. It's all the intangible things that they're providing you, which at that phase of the company are probably more important.
Well, advice given. I think hopefully a lot of people have given that some food for thought and be able to really, I think, be open about having those conversations and also knowing that, hey, you got to be serious about your company and about kind of the whole process to really get some traction going. So I think with that, would love for you in our Thai tradition to be able to give some advice. So speaking to someone that's a founder in your current stage, let's say that they have an MVP, they've secured some, initial seed funding, and now are looking to scale and get ready for that, institutional funding. What advice would you give them as far as some lessons learned through your journey and what to look out for and how to really get that energy going so that they can go to an institution and really, be able to have a strong pitch, but have all the pieces together in one place?
Sure. So, I mean, so some of this might be more tangible, and some of it's going to be a little bit, I guess, less tactical. But the first thing, and I'm saying this, I guess, to even myself, there is a lot of, you have to overcome so many hurdles and so much discouragement in this journey. And I think, more than anything else, as a founder, it's just the ability to get up every day and believe that you have as much, if not more, ability to figure it out than anyone else. I'm constantly reminded that there's no secret sauce. There's no, I don't want to say there's no fast track. There's obviously better or worse decisions to be made, but I think in general, there's no secret sauce, and, staying the course is more than half the battle. I think at this stage, what I'm learning is, when we were looking at like seed and bridge capital, I think a lot of those conversations, or at least a lot of what the investors were looking at, it was more about me and it was more about the team. It was about, do you believe in this jockey? Are they going to be the right person or people to get it to the next phase? As we get further down the road, it's becoming very clear to me that I don't want to say it's less about me, but it is. It's more about the numbers. And so I think we're at that growing up phase of the company where what's becoming much more relevant to the investors is being able to prove an obvious pathway to profitability and a reasonable, exit. And so just understanding that as a founder, I think is important, that at what stage of the company's life cycle are you at, and what is important to an investor at each of those stages, I think helps to tailor the conversation, which is helpful. And, as trite as it sounds, I'm at a point now where I'm about to start trying to make like my first key hires, and even that is incredibly difficult. No one ever tells you how hard even the simplest of tasks are, but they're so tough. And like it would take a lifetime to be an expert in any one of these things, and you're going through like a dozen of them a year. So, but I think making sure that you surround yourself with a team who at the end of the day not only complements your skill set, but that you can have fun with, because it's grueling. I mean, it's a grind. And so to increase both the likelihood of success for the company, but also to increase your joy in the process, I think, being really, really strategic with your first hires is important. And if you don't know how to do that, which most of us don't have an inherent understanding of how to do that unless we have an HR background, I think getting guidance on that front is probably really, really helpful.
And as we were, I guess, closing out, we did get one question that's very specific. So I'm going to go ahead and ask that, and this will be the last question. So one of the attendees is asking, are the regulatory changes in place for telemedicine? Are the regulatory changes in place for telemedicine to grow? And then how are liability insurance aspects impacting growth of telemedicine?
Those are really two really good questions. And I'll actually add a third element to that at the end, which is sort of some of the other intangible elements of telemedicine and its growth. So the first is about regulatory policy. And I do feel that the regulatory policy has evolved significantly over the course of this year to encourage growth in telemedicine. I'll give two examples. The first is that, CMS, which is our our Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services here in the U.S., it is essentially the thought leader. It's what most commercial insurers follow as far as policy changes. But they made a decision this year where a telemedicine visit was reimbursed at the same level as an in-person visit. I think that was really huge when you talk about incentivizing and motivating clinicians, doctors, nurse practitioners, et cetera, to even begin to try to practice telemedicine. So that was huge. The other thing that we saw was that almost all, not all, but almost all of the state medical boards in the US allowed for cross-state border practice of telemedicine. So if I'm a physician licensed in the state of Georgia and I want to take care of a patient in Texas, before COVID, that was not possible. Now it is, and it's encouraged. And so I think you're starting to see policy changes like that are very much encouraging the growth of telemedicine. From a liability perspective, I will say, again, COVID it's a blessing and it's not a blessing. I would never wish for something like this again, but it is accelerating the growth of telemedicine, but it comes with its own challenges. So I could even speak to our personal insurance. I know that our premium this year, and we were a telemedicine company before COVID, but I think now telemedicine is becoming much more, it's on the forefront of everyone's mind. Our premiums tripled this year. And, we weren't doing anything different. Our model is exactly the same as it was on December 31st, 2019. But, now so anyway, I think people are becoming more aware, but it is coming in some ways at a cost. And the last thing I'll add there, which is kind of like these intangible things, there's a lot of other policy changes that have to be made in order to accommodate telemedicine's growth. And there are things that you don't even think about until you find yourself in a situation. So for example, there's many payment processors, for example, that won't service telemedicine companies. And so when you talk about, are we going to be able to increase growth? Well, you need basic support services, basic admin services in order to do that. And so I think we'll catch up. This year has been at warp speed. We're like all aging in dog years. So the policy will catch up, and it's showing signs that it's going to support it. But I do think, some of those changes have to follow suit in order to continue to grow the industry.
Angela, thank you again for your time, and also for everyone in the audience, investors, other healthcare entrepreneurs. Angela will be representing Atlanta as part of the Thai Women competition that's going to be taking place in Dubai. So if you want to get connected to her, shout out, she'll be on that platform. But again, Atlanta, startup that is making waves, and again, shed some good insights. So Angela, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it, and look forward to catching up again soon.
Thank you so much. Take care.